That was, of course, from the three idiots. But we don't have idiots on our show. We have some of the country's top experts on education who've tracked this issue and have contributed in different ways to the entire process of, in a way, analyzing this. Dr. K. Kasturirangan, Chairperson, National Education Policy 2019, is someone I spoke to earlier, and we'll listen to him. Rekha Krishnan is Principal of Vasant Valley School, one of the country's top schools. Professor Dinesh Singh is former Vice Chancellor DU. Yogendra Yadav, National President Swaraj India, but he's coming today in his hat as someone who's written extensively on this issue of higher education reform. And Dr. Rukmini Banerjee is CEO of Pratham Education Foundation that has done remarkable work in the field of school education. Thank you all very much for joining me. I'm going to divide this into 4 clear parts. The first part is an issue which for the last 24 hours has sparked off a debate. Simple question. Mother tongue or English as a medium of instruction? Remember, the big question that this NEP has in a way reflected is that wherever possible it should be mother tongue, at least up to class 5. Before I come to my guest, listen in to what Dr. Kasturirangan had to say when I asked him this question. This is what Dr. Kasturirangan had to say, explaining what was the medium of instruction. Was it mandatory to have it in regional language, or was it optional?
The most important point, and one of the key points I would like to say, if not most important, is the questions of what is the medium of instruction. You know, the language, as soon as the first draft was put, there was this question of whether Hindi will be imposed in the South. We clarified that part of it. And we also said that the 3-language formula is a flexible formula. No individual language, no specific language will be imposed on any state if the state doesn't want it. But the ability to learn 3 languages, which has been a part of the earlier formula of the earlier policies, certainly had been carried forward, because we recognize it is probably the optimal approach so far as the learning of language is concerned. So it is a 3-language formula that we are talking of. It is flexible. Now, the importance of the 3-language formula and our recommendation that the mother tongue or the home language or the regional language or the local language could be the medium of instruction stems from the better knowledge that we have today with respect to the type of effectiveness that the local language or the mother tongue provides for a kid.
So there you've got Dr. Kasturirangan saying that the multilingual formula will stay, but it is useful to have your mother tongue taught to you as a young child. Let me ask Dr. Rukmini Banerjee whether you agree with this. As someone who's tracked school education, do you agree that till 5th standard, the medium of instruction should be in mother tongue or regional language, even if it is optional at the moment?
I think that it's a very good sign that we are really concerned about what language will be best for children as they start their learning journey. And I think that sometimes, no disrespect meant to the press, that it gets sensationalized into sort of binary categories. The whole point, I think, is that the child's home and the child's school should be as close to each other as possible. And therefore, the language that the child is most familiar with, I'm thinking now of, I myself belong to Bihar, that nobody really speaks Hindi at home. So the language that the children speak at home and the language that is used commonly for the formal part of school is often quite different. And therefore, an effort made to really bring the home language and the school language closer in a serious way, I think, has to be tried out. And in that sense, I think that there could be, finally, in Indian education, a lot of different experiments that are done to bring these two things. I often think that the language that we really should operate in is the playground language. That's the language in which most children are communicating to each other, and a language that the teacher has to understand if she wants to teach the children. 3 languages is a lot of languages, and so I think that those have to be considered one by one as children get old.
Interesting. The playground language is the language that you should be taught in as a child. Rekha Krishnan, you come from one of the country's top English medium schools. Do you believe that English must be an option and that no language can be mandatory even up to class 5, whether it's mother tongue, whether it's Hindi? That must be left to each school to decide.
I would like to begin by saying that research across the country, and we have a very distinguished panel over here, so they know better than I do, that it has been proven time and again that learning in the initial years for a child happens best if the child is learning in her mother tongue. But having said that, we need to move away from the nomenclature of an English medium school or a Hindi medium school. I don't think we belonged in the 21st century. We should have English medium or Hindi medium schools. We are schools for learning, and we need to use the medium that is best suited for the child. And as Rukmini Banerjee said, that it is important for us to use the playground language. So no matter what we do in the classroom, the teacher willy-nilly moves into using language or words or expressions that help the child understand. So sometimes she's using English, sometimes she's using Hindi, sometimes she's talking to a child in Bangla because she knows that this child comes from a Bengali speaking home, or if the teacher does have the skills. So I do not like this siloization of schools into English medium or Hindi medium. We are learning organizations where the language that the child is most comfortable with. Yes, Vasant Valley School is a place where most of our students come from homes where perhaps English or Hindi is spoken, and therefore we use English and a lot of Hindi in our classrooms. But having said that, a teacher should be able to converse in the language that the child is most comfortable with at home.
I'll tell you where the debate sparked off in the last 24 hours, and Professor Dinesh Singh, you respond to this. There's a feeling that English is the language of aspiration. All over this country, there are English-speaking coaching classes in small towns. Why should someone be deprived of English till class 5 if, let's say, they are living in rural Bihar and eventually want to use English? The other side is, this is the moment to encourage mother tongue, particularly when you're young, and there is cognitive knowledge, according to Dr. Kasturi Rangan, which improves if you study, let's say, science as a 7-year-old or 8-year-old in your mother tongue, or mathematics.
Well, Rajdeep, I would agree with Dr. Kasturi Rangan to a large extent. There are enough studies, and people all over time have said that mother tongue is the best language to introduce a child to. Things are changing, as I think Rukmani said, that in her home the mother tongue was a different language from what is the native language of Bihar. So there will always be some of these things, but for the larger crowd, the large majority in Uttar Pradesh or in Bihar or in Gujarat, it is the mother tongue of a large number of people, and there it would be wise to give them an opportunity to begin their education in their mother tongue. There are enough studies to show that that is the most beneficial way. So I would encourage that. But just quickly to add to my co-panelist from the Vasant Valley School,
yes,
that it also depends on the teacher. A teacher must be adept. It's a huge challenge for us to make sure that our teachers now rise to the occasion in many ways vis-a-vis this policy. And one of those ways is to be able to handle students in a multilingual way, at least 2 or 3 languages. That's very important and very productive. So we have to handle these issues together.
Sure. But let's be honest, and Yogendra Yadav, you were the one who commented immediately after the policy was announced, saying it's nothing new. This is multilingualism without imposing any language. Neither has Hindi been imposed on the states of the South, even post 5th standard. You can have your 3 languages. Do you believe to that extent that there is a built-in flexibility? Or do you believe that there should be an attempt to make mother tongue mandatory in some schools or in schools in general?
Rajdeep, the advantage of having a good panel is that you at least agree on basics. And I'm very happy that everyone on the panel agrees on this basic cognitive principle that children should be given primary education in the language they are most comfortable with already. And Rajdeep, for at least 95% children in this country, the language they speak at home, the playground language, and the language of most people in their localized school is the same. So that should obviously be the language of a medium of instruction. How can there possibly be an argument about it?
No, I'll tell you where the argument, Professor Yadav, sorry to interrupt. I have a friend who runs a school in rural Maharashtra. He says, my children may lose out because they come from poorer backgrounds. They may not be able to afford, let's say, English tutors. They may not speak English at home. When they come to class 6, if until then they haven't had enough English experience, they may lose out. Bengal, many believe, lost out because they enforced a Bengali till class 5. Do you believe that that is a good way forward to insist on mother tongue till class 5? I know the policy doesn't, but do you believe that's...
I'm glad you interrupted and asked this question. It was good because even educated Indians don't make this absolutely elementary distinction between learning English as a language, which is necessary, I would say mandatory, and whatever the other problems of colonialism. This is one gift we are left with, so why not use it? But that is very different from English as a medium of instruction, which is an intellectual problem, which is an obstacle. In Britain, recently they have all discovered that learning Mandarin is a very smart thing. So in all our schools in London, I now realize they are teaching Mandarin. But no British teacher would ever think of teaching history and geography through Mandarin. That would be barbarity. The same thing applies to India. How can we possibly debate? And Rajdeep, and in these discussions, what we forget is that most Indian English medium schools in this country are not like Vasantwari. Come to my village, come to this country. In most so-called English medium schools, which are mushrooming, the child does not know English, the parents do not know any English, and the teacher does not know any English. And these are called English medium schools. This is pedagogic barbarity of the worst kind. How can we possibly promote it? Having said this, let me also say something about politics. This country is a country of linguistic apartheid. English speakers rule this country. No matter what is written in this policy, it shall not be implemented.
Interesting. We will wait and see whether that linguistic apartheid continues. I want to move to the next big question, which is board exams and undergraduate courses. Remember, the entire notion of board exams is sought to be changed to make them, to give the student more options. You can have a basic or a higher level of examinations, and you can structure it better according to the new education policy, even in class 10 or 12. Also, undergraduate courses are being transformed, giving exit options. After the first year, you can exit, move to another course, and then return, almost like in the United States. Listening to what Dr. Kasturi Rangan had to say about the basis for doing this.
If you look at this is actually the considerations related to this kind of fixing up the scheduling of school education comes from our better understanding of neural sciences. We had a lot of discussion with the people who have been working on the early childhood education and also the early childhood care, coming out of the fact that how their brain growth evolves. So what I want to say is, you cannot have a structured form of learning up to the age of a structure, because different brain growths are at different paces. Right. So we cannot. So that is why we call it as a foundational period, a period where perceptual, conceptual, and subsequently prescriptive, and finally ability to fix up abstract ways of thinking. So there are 4 steps in which the brain growth capability is identified, and the educational structuring and the school level because of this. The earlier examination is more to evaluate the student, how the whole program is progressing. Whether 3 years or 5 years and things of that kind. 10 years we have left because there is currently this 10 plus 2. There can be a point at which a certain level of education will help you to get into a professional thing. But we finally think a total picture of up to age of 18, which is up to class 12, that is 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. The 4 years of secondary education is the most important aspect of the overall multidisciplinary orientation, where you can also provide for exit options. So we have taken that into account in trying to make sure that on one side, the 12 years, the education at the last 4 years provides the multidisciplinary orientation opportunities for that, and you are prepared for that from the early phase of both in the preparatory as well as the middle school. There is 3 years and 3 years, and finally you also provide an exit option. This is one of the
exit options for college students doing a 4-year undergraduate. Dinesh Singh, how do you see this? Do you believe this will transform the way higher education will be taught in this country, or do you believe there are more fundamental problems in the quality of teaching, again, in the way our colleges are?
Oh, certainly. There are lots of other issues which are also very, very important. But let me sort of tell you, Rajdeep, that at the University of Delhi, when I was the Vice Chancellor, we figured out that approximately 30% of the students drop out each year. It's a huge dropout rate. Many of them drop out in their second year, and they have nothing to show for their efforts. What we had made as a provision was that they could carry a piece of paper that certified what they had achieved in the university, and within a 10-year period, they could come back and complete their degrees. Their places would be assured. So that was a provision. And lots of, I know the university was also striving to make sure that the dropout rate declines. But there were many things that were beyond our control. Lots of girls from rural areas were being forced into marriage against their wishes and had to drop out of education. So all those things were not exactly in our control.
Right.
Yet, we made that provision, and it would have served us well had we carried the program through. So I endorsed this provision of, an exit option. Of course, I mean, they must also always be told that they have this opportunity of coming back and enabling themselves to a higher level. But it's a good issue. There are other major issues. One of the biggest issues, Rajdeep, is to reorient our teachers to cater to the needs and challenges of the program, both at the school level and at the university level. It takes enormous effort before you can get that going. So that's a huge challenge, much more important than the exit option challenge.
The challenge of teacher training remains a major challenge. Let's just come to examinations. I put some flashes of that. But Rukmini Banerjee, that's been seen in school education. The government is talking about vocational training, about internships. I could be in class 8 and I could take 15 days off and work as an intern with vocational training. They're also talking about restructuring exams. But all these steps, do you see them as necessarily innovative, and will they be really possible on the ground? Is our school system equipped to provide these internships and vocational training?
I mean, I'd like to say that the key part of this policy that I am very excited about is really these early foundations and them being done really well. While it's been well known for a long time that early childhood education is important, but I think this continuum that you start a couple of years before first standard and then all the way to first and second, this is a continuum, and that we need to build it well, and that if we do this, and I think that several places in the document, even in the fact document that came out, it basically said that if you don't achieve this well, then the rest of the policy is irrelevant. So I think giving this centrality to a good early foundation is very important. Now, the translation of this into practice is going to be, there's going to be a lot of challenges. This continuum actually crosses over from different institutional structures, different departments. But for example, there are states in India who have already been perhaps a little bit ahead of the curve. I know in Punjab, for the last couple of years, there's been a pre-primary grade added inside their government primary school system. Himachal has done the same. And they've been already very actively looking about how to really work closely with Anganwadis.
Right.
Many schools in India have Anganwadis already co-located. So I think this is a great opportunity for people to come together, because this is really one of the, I know higher education is important and a lot of eminent people on this panel, but most people won't get there if we don't start solid and well and make that a very high priority.
Okay, so you've answered my question on vocation by looking back first at primary education and saying that's where it starts. But Rekha Krishnan, why don't you take that then? The fact is that higher education is where I sense that there is massive transformation planned in board exams, in this whole idea of vocational training with internships. Do you see all of this actually transforming the way higher education is taught, particularly in that critical age from class 8 to class 12?
Yes and no, Rajdeep, because I think, my biggest concern over here, and I agree with Rukmini Banerjee when she says, I love the focus on foundational numeracy, literacy, that whole basic thrust of the document on the early childhood care and education is brilliant, and the rest of it will not be relevant if this doesn't get put into place. But my big concern is it is all very well to say the competency-based assessment, vocational education, weave in vocational education into the curriculum. But all these are policies. This is a vision statement. We have to see whether it can be implemented and who is going to. How are you going to interpret it? So the interpretation of this document and the implementation of this document is to be seen by the various state governments. So it is, yes, vocational education at any level is good, but then vocational education, this whole focus on teacher education, but are the best students in the country coming into teaching as a profession? Are students from schools, like so many schools in the country, are they going to place any value on vocational education? Unless and until at a policy level, we also give a fillip to those. We give an impetus to that area. We make teacher education, or we make teaching as a profession attractive. We make various vocational courses like carpentry or electrician's course or whatever, make it more, or gardening, make it more attractive, make it more, there should be more remuneration for those courses. Otherwise, who is going to go into vocation? Yes, at some level, vocational education is important, but
what about the change in the exam structure, 10th and 12th standard exams, the changes that are proposed in the 10th and 12th standard exams, having objective, optional questions, multi-choice questions, are these all good ideas or not?
I think there's a very good idea making the class 10 and 12 board examinations more flexible by giving them another option, by asking them to giving them an opportunity to improve their results is a good plan. But having said that, in the same document, there is also an introduction of assessment at class 3, class 5 and class 8 level. And we know that those are not going to be the exams which have got serious takeaways from there, except for understanding whether learning is happening or not, what are the learning outcomes. But in our country, the minute you introduce exams, there is this big hauwa that is created in the society that, oh my God, now students who are as young as 8 years old are going to do examinations or are going to be assessed. So the class 10 and 12 examination restructuring is good, but we also need to look at the other parts of the document which talk about assessments for children as young as 8 years old.
Let me therefore turn to you, Yogendra Yadav, but before that I turn to you, I want you to look at this question and what Dr. Kasturi Rangan had to say, because this is critical. Can we really build a knowledge society? Intent versus implementation. This is the question I asked him. Do we really have the intent, for example, to invest, as the policy says, 6.1% of our GDP in education from 1.7%? Listen to what Dr. Kasturi Rangan said.
I think these are two separate issues. Just by learning our ancient heritage doesn't mean that you're going to sacrifice your scientific temper. In fact, if you want to understand the ancient Indian heritage and the ancient Indian strengths, we need to have a scientific temper to understand it. The very premise in which you try to learn things in this country in the renewed context of our development, the basis is the scientific temper. If I have to answer you, I have to think twice about what is the basis for it and whether there's a logic, whether you will pick it up and appreciate it or not. That is scientific temper. Does that deter me from learning the history and the kind of things that ancient Indian was? I don't think they are two separate things. I think it's getting mixed up. And this is getting mixed up for the reasons which is beyond either scientific temper or the ancient knowledge. There is something more than that. I cannot comment on this, but I see no contradiction whatsoever. And if India is certain, if you look at countries which are now economically becoming stronger, one of the key elements is they also look at their past, look at the studies of the strengths of the past, and then try to fold it into it. And more importantly, also feel proud of the fact that you come from that genre, and today you are in the world of scheme of things in the world where you are outstanding. And this is exactly what this country should be also looking for. We have already done it in many ways, but we want to strengthen that system. Right. But I can assure you, scientific temper in no way compromises our learning in the interest of knowing about ancient heritage and vice versa. They are two separate things, but they can certainly be complementing each other, because the need of understanding anything, you need a scientific temper. You can't avoid it.
You know, you're listening there to Dr. Kasturi Rangan. Your view, Yogendra Yadav, can we really build a knowledge society, or is there a huge gap between intent and implementation? Just look at teacher absenteeism, look at the quality of government schools and colleges.
Rajiv, first of all, I completely agree with Dr. Kasturi Rangan that there is no contradiction between a scientific temper and wanting to build on our cultural heritage. I would in fact go forward and say there has never been a truly modern country which has not drawn upon its own cultural heritage. So I agree there. I must confess that when I started reading the draft version of this report, what has come yesterday as a proper report, I began with trepidation. Saffronization, obscurantism, and technocratic education were my fears. But I must say, when I read it, and I read things with honest eyes, it actually, many of my fears were gone, because most of the curriculum-related recommendations of this report are fairly sensible. Whether it is about introducing liberal education in higher education, restructuring of higher education, restructuring of school education, redoing assessment, all of that would take enormous work. Vision statement won't do. But the vision statement is correct. And like Rukmini and everyone else, the one that I'm most excited about is early childhood care and education. Teaching children at the age of 3 to 5. If we can do that, and then numeracy and literacy, this is what I'm most excited about.
But you need quality. You need again quality teachers for that, don't you?
Yeah. Now, in order to do that, you need teachers. First of all, you need more funds. You need political will to put in more resources. Number 2, you need to pay attention to the equity dimension. Number 3, you need courage to take on the commercialization and privatization of education, which is happening. I do not see, and if I have only one serious complaint against this document, that there is very perfunctory dealing with questions of equity and questions of commercialization and privatization. And I feel that in the absence of that, this is what is going to happen.
Equity is a big word. Rukmini, you want to intervene? Just look at the huge gaps that exist between our schools, between a Vasant Valley, let's say on one side, and let's say another school which may not have the same facilities. How this document doesn't tell me how those gaps are going to be overcome.
Rajdeep, I think I just want to add a little bit to what Yogendra ji just said, and I'll come back to the equity question. I think that we have teachers, of course, like everybody else, teachers, bankers, anyone, we can always be better. But I think there is enough evidence in India. We work a lot with state governments to say that when you put a priority, when you put a focus, when you say that my kids must learn how to read and to do basic arithmetic, the same teachers, the same block officials, the same cluster people, if there is direction on top, are actually able to produce quite good results. We've done these catch-up programs with the government of Uttar Pradesh, with Karnataka, with Bihar, and we see that it really comes from prioritizing what is important. And my big hope is that with the direction provided by this, mega policy, and with this goal that if you don't achieve these basic foundations early and well, then the rest of it will give us that force. Of course, there is equity issues. Within the same class, there are children of many different levels. But there is nothing wrong with our children. There is nothing wrong with our teachers. We just need to prioritize. And then I think if that is done as a national mission, we should be able to do actually far better than we've been doing.
Let me raise one final issue, which was, of course, the headline in a lot of newspapers today. Will foreign universities make education costlier? Remember, the new economic policy or the national education policy makes it possible for foreign universities to enter. This is what Dr. Kasturi Rangan had to say, whether there was any opposition to that.
I can tell you, in consultation on this policy with various stakeholders, including the different segments of national ideologies, I did not find any concerns that India should interact with the best of the institutions in the world and should have nexus between the best of the institution in the world and here, and if necessary, bring the best of their experiences into our soil, and in the process also build up our own capability. Mind you, that we have made recommendation for restructuring and reconfiguring the higher education institution from the present fragmented state. And that fragmentation we want to reduce by creating research and teaching and research and degree-giving autonomous colleges.
So there was no opposition from the RSS?
There was no opposition.
There was no opposition from the RSS to this idea of...
I had not opposition from anybody on this. When I talk of anybody, it includes all the sections of the stakeholders with whom we had consultation. So there is no question on that.
Opposition to the idea of foreign universities. Remember, the BJP had opposed foreign universities in 2010, but Dinesh Singh, as a former Vice Chancellor, Delhi University, do you believe this will be part of that privatization, commercialization question that Yogendra Yadav briefly referred to, where we'll have very different standards between university, or do you believe this is an idea whose time has come?
You know, Rajdeep, I'm in touch with many foreign institutions. I am associated formally with some of them in the UK and the US, and for a long time. Let me tell you, I haven't come across a single foreign institution that is sort of eager to come and establish base in India. They're not sort of falling over each other to come and do things here. I can assure you on that count, number one. Number two, if they come and do things, let us do our own things and improve ourselves, bring ourselves up to speed and do good things. Then why would people want to be so concerned about what a foreign institution does? And number three, you know, we had plans at the University of Delhi. Sometimes maybe we planned too much, but our objective was to set up campuses in Western nations. Why aren't our universities thinking of that? Let's reach a level and offer things at a level which are not so expensive as what the Western countries have on their soil, and offer good things to them on their campus, on their soil. Let's build ourselves up. So that is something I'm not too worried about, so long as we live up to what we need to do. But Rajdeep, very quickly, if you give me 2 minutes, I just wanted to say that this business of, you know, vocationalization is always have been looked down upon in India. Gandhiji had repeatedly emphasized that in education, what you do with your hands enters your heart. I think, and the Mimamsa school of philosophy is so ancient but so wise, says that knowledge without action is meaningless. We should enlarge this from vocationalization to putting knowledge into action and gaining knowledge from action. It's a two-way process. Knowledge and skills are two sides of the same coin. And finally, this thing about, you know, our heritage in the past, as Dr. Kasturi Rangan and even Yogendra emphasized, looking at it with a scientific temper, with a rational mind, there is much to learn. You know, 200 years before the time of Jesus Christ and 1800 years before it was discovered in Europe, a poet in India called Pingal discovered through Sanskrit poetry mathematics of a very high kind. It is known as Pascal's triangle in Europe, but he called it the Meru Prastha. And I am so sad to see that no Sanskrit student, no mathematics student has ever tried to attempt using computers what Pingal did using with his mind and his knowledge of maths and Sanskrit. All these things, you know, will regenerate. And, you know, one of the most distinguished mathematicians of our times, Manjul Bhargav, has used Bhaskaracharya's ideas of the 12th century to make his discoveries, which led him to, you know, receive the Fields Medal. All these things, I'm not saying that everybody should delve into that only for that reason, but it does help and it gives us some self-confidence. It also tells us how they're thought. There is much transdisciplinarity there.
I just want to end though with Professor Yadav, because I often end with him to give a final perspective on quality. I want to use this word. Will this new education policy actually raise the bar of quality? Or is it simply a vision statement?
Rajdeep, education policies are vision statements, and we cannot fault a vision statement for being a vision statement. We can only say whether as a vision statement it is good or not. To my mind, it has put the question of quality on the front burner, which is what needed to be done. We have looked at access, we have looked at equity. The question of quality needed to be foregrounded. This policy has done it. It should be complemented. On the international question, I wanted to say something. You know, this business of exchange with international universities, that's a euphemism. The real issue is, will they wish to set up a shop here? They will if they can make money. When will they make money? When our elite children will start exiting Delhi University and other universities and Pune and Mumbai University and start going to these international universities. And my fear is that the coming of these universities will coincide with a sudden decline in our universities. The real issue is most of our state universities, where about 90% of our higher education students study, they are starved. They do not have facilities. So our focus should be on that. Let us not be distracted by what happens to 2 or 3% of our population. Let's keep our focus firmly on 90%. On balance, I would say this report brings this report builds on the previous education policies, builds on many other documents, which it doesn't quite acknowledge, but I'm happy that it builds on those previous government documents as well. It can take forward. The real issue is political will. The real issue is capacity to put money where the mouth is, and that is what we need to check.
Well, if the budget as is visualized rises from 1.7% to 6.1%, it would be a game changer. And I think the very fact that we've spent the majority of this primetime show debating education is a good sign. We need to trigger off this debate, maybe look at specific areas, primary education, higher education and university education, and carry forward this debate in various forms. These are the issues of our times. As I remarked on Twitter, the choice was between covering Sushant Singh Rajput and covering education. I believe we chose the right choice for once on prime time. Thank you all very much for joining me here on this debate this evening. The debate must continue on education reform.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.